Have you ever tried to imagine an alternate history? What if Rome never fell? What if Columbus never sailed? What if the Confederacy had won the American Civil War or the Nazis the Second World War? These what ifs are entertaining, but they do something much more interesting. They force us to see history as a system. Small changes cascade, structures matter, and suddenly outcomes aren't inevitable anymore. Today we are applying that same system thinking not to Europe, not to America. We go into Imperial China. And from here into one of the most ambitious pieces of fan-made science fiction ever written. A story that turns development itself into the main character. Here's a list of what we'll explore. How the Ming Dynasty actually worked and why it mattered. A radical thought experiment. Hundreds of modern Chinese nerds sent back to 1628 to industrialize from scratch. The worldview behind the story, the Industrial Party and High-Modernism. And the core question underneath it all, can progress be engineered by experts or does it have to grow organically? By the end, you won't just understand this strange sci-fi project, you'll see development, state power and progress itself a little differently. Buckle up, it's going to be a hell of a ride. Let's rewind the clock. It's the 15th century. You're living in China during one of the most prosperous eras the country has ever known. Cities are booming, trade is expanding, the state is powerful, confident and deeply organized. This is the Ming Dynasty, which ruled China from 1368 to 1644. It restored native rule after the Mongol era and built a centralized yet sometimes rigid state that oversaw a remarkable cultural and economic flowering. The government ran on meritocratic exams and dense administrative layers. Massive resources flowed into infrastructure. The Great Wall was rebuilt, the Grand Canal connecting Beijing with the south upgraded, and the Forbidden City constructed as a symbol of imperial order. The economy surged, agriculture expanded, cities grew, and trade intensified. Alongside India, Ming China accounted for a huge share of global economic output during these times. China was also, for a time at least, outward looking. The most famous example is Zheng He's voyages. Enormous state-sponsored fleets that sailed through Southeast Asia and all the way to East Africa, centuries before European colonial empires took shape. But this early confidence didn't last. By the late Ming period, internal factionalism, fiscal strain, corruption and rebellion hollowed out the state. In 1644, the dynasty finally collapsed. The Qing that followed inherited a vast empire, but also deeply structural problems. Population growth outpacing resources, bureaucratic rigidity, and eventually pressure from industrialized Western powers. By the 18th and 19th century, China found itself outproduced, outarmed, and outorganized. What had once been the world's most advanced civilization was now struggling to keep up. This moment, the Great Divergence, left a lasting scar on the Chinese historical imagination. And it's also exactly where our story begins. Enter the Morning Star of Lingao. This is a massive, crowd-written Chinese web novel born directly from that specific question. What if China's decline could be deliberately reversed? In the mid-2000s, Chinese online forums were full of debates about why China lost its might and fell behind the West. Out of those debates, a group of history buffs, engineers, and tech-minded fans pushed the thought experiment to its limit. The result was Morning Star of Lingao, also known as Illuminine Lingao, a sprawling, collaborative, alternate history project launched in 2009 and still being updated today. It's part fiction, part engineering simulation, part national development fantasy. The premise is simple and completely unhinged. More than 500 modern Chinese engineers, scientists and historians intentionally travel back to the year 1628, just before the Ming collapse. They land in Lingao on Hainan Island, then a remote, disease-ridden exile zone at the empire's edge. Their mission is to trigger an industrial revolution centuries early. What follows feels like Factorio meets Robinson Crusoe. They have to take care of base materials such as iron, steel, machine tools, textiles, chemicals. Building on that, printing presses, sanitation systems, early steam experiments. Also, a bureaucracy and planned economy capable of supporting heavy industry. And last but not least, the real boss fight, supply chains, for even more supply chains. A recent Wired feature described the novel as the phenomenon tied to real debates in China about technocracy, planning and development. And notably, the enemy isn't villains, it's physics, logistics, institutions. Modern knowledge doesn't magically produce stainless steel or nitric acid. You still need resources, energy, skilled labor, tools, and time. At one point, characters admit it may take a decade just to build the machines they need to build other machines. So what worldview is driving the story? In modern China, there's an online subculture often called the Industrial Party. It's not an actual political party, but a loose community that celebrates industrial capacity, technocratic expertise, and state-led development. Its members tend to be skeptical of liberal democracy, which they see as slow, fragmented, and inefficient. Views differ. Some favor more markets, others favor heavy planning. But the shared belief is simple. Industrial capacity determines national destiny. This mindset echoes themes described by Dan Wang in his book Breakneck, where he contrasts China as an engineering state, relentlessly focused on building and executing large-scale projects with efficiency and speed, with the United States as a more lawyerly society. Zooming out, this fits into a broader ideology known as High-Modernism. Political scientist James C. Scott used this term to describe the belief that science, technology, and expert planning can redesign society at scale. Scott warned, though, that this mindset often ignores local knowledge, simplifies complex systems, and can fail spectacularly, especially when paired with authoritarian power. We've seen it before, in Soviet planning, in centrally designed capitals, in grand schemes that look perfect on paper. In Lingao, the time travelers built centralized bureaucracies, planned production systems, strict education regimes, and treat history like something that can be engineered. It's high modernism in narrative form. The promises of this worldview are relatively clear and obvious on first sight. Speed and scale. Coordinated planning builds ports, grids, and factories fast. Systems thinking. Identify bottlenecks, steel, fertilizer, energy, and attack them directly. But there are also pitfalls. According to Scott, these include local knowledge getting overridden, simplification creating fragility, big plans often requiring big coercion. To the novel's credit, Morning Star of Lingao doesn't hide these tensions. It shows supply chain breakdowns, social resistance, and ethical gray zones around expert rule. Even Wired noted that beneath the techno-optimism lies a self-aware, sometimes unsettling undertone. So what does all of this tell us? Think of development as two columns. In column A, you have a designed process. This is basically high modernism. You start with a plan. You move from goals to sectors to inputs. You use experts to push foundational industries, steel, energy, shipyards. And you accept short-term pain for long-term capacity. In column B, you have a more evolved process, a more spontaneous order. You might start locally, experiment, scale what works. Treat the economy as a complex adaptive system. You let incentives, not blueprints, do the heavy lifting. You also respect human behavior, traditions, and limits. In reality, most successful countries blend both. States build infrastructure and fund basic research. Markets, firms, and communities innovate at the edges. Even in Chinese economic policy, you can see traces of both approaches. The hard question is always balance. How much should be designed and by whom? You see, sometimes alternate history isn't escapism, it's a stress test for ideas. Watching Lingao wrestle with materials to processes to institutions feels far more honest than stories where a single genius solves everything with one invention. By the way, the American counterpart to this is the book 1632, where a whole town in West Virginia gets transported to the Holy Roman Empire and industrialization happens. So, to conclude, High-Modernism captures the ambition behind nation building. James Scott reminds us, though, where that ambition breaks. The Industrial Party insists that industry is power. And the counter-question never goes away. At what cost and who pays it? Thank you for watching.